Joining me now from the Reagan National Defense Forum, our own panel of experts, Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin, former Bush White House advisor and Fox News contributor Karl Rove, and the director of the Ronald Reagan Institute, Roger Zakheim. Thank you all for joining us for this special conversation. Karl, I'll start with you. How do you see the defense posture, the Defense Department, shifting or changing under a second Trump administration?
Well, the Reagan Foundation did a very excellent poll, which I hope guides them, which says the American people are deeply concerned about the state of America's military today. They overwhelmingly support additional spending. They want America to lead and be involved in the world. What was remarkable to me is 57% of all voters said we want America to be more involved in the world. And even more amazing was maintain bases overseas. 62% of Americans said they were in favor of it, 62% of Trump voters, and 63% of MAGA voters. There is a natural feeling that America is living in a dangerous world, and the way to bring about peace and prosperity is through a policy of strength. Yeah,
and the survey also showed that people think that we need better defense production. When we asked about that, you asked about that. Do we need a lot more? 40% said that, and a little more, 33%. So, Roger, that you're at 73% of the people you polled who think we've got to ramp it up. And listen, our resources are being, tied across many, many different battlefields at this point.
The security environment demands it. Now, Congressman Gallagher's right. We need to reform the Department of Defense, but it needs to result in more production. And the American people in this survey, as Karl pointed out, are comfortable with investing in national defense. They're concerned that our focus on the national debt will come at the cost of national defense. But overwhelming number of those polled, 79%, the most we've had it since we run the survey, said we need to make investment in national defense. Donald Trump ran on a policy of peace through strength. He's the first presidential candidate to do so since President Reagan did that. Now this survey helps identify what are the things he can do and the American people support to realize peace through strength.
Yeah, and Jen, to that point, he comes into office with a whole slate of major foreign policy challenges, and now what's flaring up in Syria, that's a whole new front.
Well, I think what is really different from when he left office is there are a lot of changes. You look at Iran, it's 2 weeks from breakout in terms of having a nuclear weapon. You look at what's happening in China. President Xi has set 2027 and told his military to be ready to take Taiwan in 2027. He may not do it then, but he told his military to be ready. And you have a war in Europe that needs to be resolved. And as you mentioned, Syria is falling apart as we speak. You have this group, an once Al-Qaeda affiliated group, and this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem for Israel. They are sending troops up to the border. We have 900 U.S. troops in eastern Syria. They're very concerned. The Kurds that are allied with the U.S. are guarding 45,000 ISIS families and fighters. It has very serious implications for the region.
Yeah, that's just one of the trouble spot regions. And Roger, also in your survey, when you asked people about what the biggest threats are, China clearly at the top of the list. But I also found this was interesting. Only 52% of people feel confident that if the U.S. got into a conflict with China, that we would win.
Yeah, it's so surprising that barely a majority of American people think that the U.S. military can prevail in a conflict with China. The reality is that China's engaged in the most dramatic military buildup in generations. I mean, you have to go back to what the Soviet Union did after the Cuban Missile Crisis to see a buildup of this nature. So the American people actually are right. In the Indo-Pacific region, the Chinese actually are at par. They're a peer with the U.S. military. Their industrial capacity really outperforms the United States. There's real reason to be concerned. One of the things that came out of the survey is related to the PRC, the People's Republic of China, but it's also related to Russia and some of the things that Jen just referenced. The American people know who the adversaries are. They know who the good guys are, and they know who the bad guys are. Russia, 80% view as an adversary. On the flip side, Israel, Ukraine, they have the support on par with Japan, over 73, 74%. Peace through strength, that policy that will come out of the Trump administration needs to make sure that we're supporting the good guys, the ones that American people support, and recognize who the adversary is, in this case, PRC, Russia, Iran, North Korea.
Well, and Karl, to the Russia point, the survey also asks about expectations. What do you think is coming next with Ukraine? How does this thing wrap up? In the survey, you found that the biggest chunk of folks. 33% think Russia is going to take over some territory. The next level, 26%, said the war will drag on indefinitely. 17% think that Ukraine will expel Russia from its territory. 14% think Russia will take over the whole country. There are a lot of expectations now. With President Trump has set some really high bars for how he's going to handle this and how quickly it will wrap up. What do you make of it?
Well, I suspect he's going to regret raising those expectations because this is a thorny problem. The only way to solve this, I think, and I think this is a generally well-held view, is muscle up. Give the Ukrainians what they need in order to prevail on the battlefield and cut the best deal possible. Zelensky has already indicated that he is willing to give up territory, and but the only way to do that and make it stable for the long haul is to muscle up. The poll points out something interesting that is a reality. The reality is, you're right, we're much different than 4 years ago or 8 years ago. And one of the biggest problems is that we now have concerted effort among 4 of America's greatest adversaries. Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea are working together. Think about it. The Iranians are providing the Russians drones. The Chinese are providing revenue by buying the oil. The North Koreans now have military forces, tens of thousands of their soldiers in Russia in order to fight Ukraine. This is something we didn't have before, where there was a concerted military alliance between these 4 great adversaries of the United States. And in the survey, the American people get it. 86% are concerned about it. They asked the question 2 different ways. In one, they said, here's all the things they're doing, and 86% of the American people in the poll said, we're concerned about that. Then they simply said they're working together and didn't give them detail. Same 86%. We understand what's going on.
And there's so many places the U.S. has to counter what's happening, and one of the places is in Africa, where China has really laid a lot of groundwork. President Biden was there this week. That visit, it feels like it's gotten overshadowed a little bit. But basically, this is what the New York Times says. China's already spent decades funding projects in the country and around the continent, leaving some to wonder whether America can compete with its rival.
This was really significant, a significant trip by President Biden. He was opening a 1,200-mile corridor that the U.S. had paid $1 billion between 4 countries, from Congo to Tanzania, Zambia, and Angola, basically so that the U.S. could have access to critical minerals like cobalt, which are needed for EVs and smartphones. But China, as you mentioned, has been, with its Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. We've been asleep at the wheel for 20 years. They already control 76% of Congo's cobalt, which is the largest cobalt supply in the world. The last U.S. mine left Congo in 2020. So while this was a significant trip by an American president, it is a pittance compared to the $42 billion that China has spent on the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa.
And quick final thought from you, Roger, about the theme, the feeling here about all that is waiting for the next president, who's been the president but will once again be the president.
A lot of anticipation. This is the theme this year is a peace through strength and a period of transition. A lot of speculation what's going to happen with the Secretary of Defense designate Pete Hegseth. But on a deeper level, what will the military strategy be in President Trump's second administration? In our survey, the American people demonstrate that they want a military that can operate and deal with the challenge in the PRC. In China, they can deal in Europe, and they can also deal with the challenges in the Middle East. That needs to be the core part of the strategy. It needs to have global reach. That's what the American people want, and that's what will be discussed here at the forum.
All right. Roger, Jen, Karl, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.